there, it's still winter here and we are running low on jam in our pantry. So I'm going to be using these frozen strawberries that we grew last year to make up some strawberry jam. There are consistency differences when you make jam without adding pectin. It is considered more of a soft spread. If you've ever made apple butter, it's like kind of like a thicker applesauce. It's kind of like that when you first open the jar. While it's delicious and can be used to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, no problem, it's not exactly the same consistency as traditional jam using added pectin. Pectin is found naturally in fruits and vegetables that thickens or gels food like jam or jelly. Some foods that are rich in pectin include apples, citrus fruits like lemons, vegetables like carrots and peas. Strawberries do have pectin, but it's not as much as those other things. So when you're canning jam, many times we add pectin to get that gel-like consistency that we usually desire when having jam. With that said, canning jam or jelly without added pectin is such a great skill to have because it gives you the ability to make homemade jam easily using what you probably already have on hand. Using lemon juice from fresh lemons as part of the recipe can add some of that desired thickness. So what I am using today are frozen strawberries from last year's garden, lemon juice, organic sugar, and some butter. I know that sounds weird, but adding a fat like butter to the jam, just a little bit, can help reduce foam on top when you're cooking it down. Now, the only lemon juice I had this day was bottled. That does not contain as much pectin as using fresh lemon. Most of the pectin, like I said earlier, is found in the peel and the pith. I just went ahead and used what I had on hand that day. And if anything, the bottled lemon juice does have a 5% acidity level that might be able to help activate any of the pectin that might already be in the strawberries, or at least that's what I'm telling myself. So we're going to go with this. Side note, if I'm not using citric acid when I'm canning, I usually am using the bottled lemon juice. It has a standard 5% acidity level, and using it in water bath canning when not adding vinegar helps to make sure that some things like tomato sauce has the right amount of acidity to can it safely. So I let the strawberries thaw a bit before I measured them to get about 8 cups. This is 8 cups, not crushed, but I get those added to the pot and crushed down with a potato masher. I added 4 tablespoons of lemon juice and 4 cups of sugar. After a bit, I added another cup of sugar. I also washed my lids to get them ready for canning. I just soak them in warm soapy water and then make sure to rinse them well. At this point, I grabbed my candy thermometer. It is not necessary to have this. There are a few ways you can do a gel test. This just lets me know if it gets to the 220 degree gelling point. If you don't have a candy thermometer, there's a couple other ways you can test it. One is like putting some of the jam on a plate, putting it in the refrigerator, and then running your finger through it after a little bit to see if it stays. The other method that I use is with the cold spoon into the jam, and if it all slides off in one sheet, then it's gotten to the gelling point that we can can it. So, but the thermometer, I have one, and it's just another way for me to double check the temperature. Once I notice the jam is foaming on top, I add a little bit of butter. The fat content in the butter helps to reduce the foam in the jam, which leads to better consistency when we can it up. Not that it matters, but the butter I am using is Kerrygold salted butter, in case anybody has that question. But if you don't want to add butter, you don't have to. There's been many times when I don't add butter and I just scrape off some of the foam on top, and the consistency in the jar is just fine. So it's really just an option. It's not something you have to do. I was just kind of in a hurry this day and wanted to eliminate that step of having to scrape off any of the foam on top. Once the jam is hot enough, I start using a cold metal spoon to test if the gel slides off in one clean sheet. Once it starts doing that, I get my jars ready. They need to be filled to 1/4 inch of headspace. Headspace is the distance between the contents of the jar and the lid. Overfilling a jar can prevent the lids from sealing. When you're canning other things like soups, it can cause siphoning, which is when the contents of the jar escapes during the canning process through the lid. Headspace varies depending on what you are canning. For example, here it's only 1/4 inch for jam, but for sauce or something, it might be 1/2 inch. So it's important to read the recipe that you're following and make sure you leave the appropriate headspace for whatever it is that you're canning. Using the bubble tool, I remove all of the air bubbles and check the headspace again. Then, using a lint-free cloth like this t-shirt rag and some distilled white vinegar, I clean the rims of the jars. Making sure there is no debris on the jar rim is important because it will help ensure that the lids will seal properly to the jars during the canning process. Then I center the lid onto the jar and tighten the jar with just the tips of my fingers until resistance is met. Over tightening a jar lid can cause lids not to seal properly. I move the jars over to the canner and wait for it to get up to a rolling boil. Once we get to that point, I set the timer for 10 minutes. Side note, my Amazon device here has been irritating me for the past couple of months because it activated some sort of Wicked theme. After I filmed this, I finally figured out how to shut it off after some research and changing settings in my account via my laptop. But anyway, we set the timer for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the timer goes off, I turn the heat off and remove the lid. You want to make sure that the lid is pointed away from your face so that the steam doesn't hit you. I let the jars kind of relax in the pot for about 5 minutes. This allows them to cool very slightly before we move them to a folded towel on the counter. We don't want to move the jars from a piping hot canner to a cool countertop because that temperature shock can cause the jars to crack or break. After the jars have had time to sit at least half a day, I go ahead and check the seals, make sure the button on top is down and that the lids are on the jars really well. I remove the bands to prevent any false sealing in the pantry, and I label the jars with the date. Most canning recipes and websites recommend that home canned items are eaten within a year, but use your best judgment. Here's what the finished product looks like. Like I said earlier, it is a softer spread than traditional jam with added pectin. It came out really good, and I liked the little bit of lemony flavor with the strawberry. It was really good. So that'll be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!